What are the pathways for future economic growth? The experts at the World Economic Forum Davos say in this intelligent age, the main driver for new growth will come from digital innovation and will not come from business as usual or playing catch up. Hello, this is Bode Oshosami on Global Business Insights, where we bring ideas and depth on some of the major business stories. This episode focuses on the World Economic Forum discussions ongoing at Davos and what we are learning about driving better growth. Gross domestic product as a lagging indicator is no more going to be enough. We already knew that, and the World Economic Forum has a new future of growth framework which assesses economic growth by focusing on the quality, balance, and alignment of growth with broader global and national priorities. The main pillars which countries in future could be assessed would be factors like inclusiveness, innovation, sustainability, and resilience. But first, here is a clip from yesterday's session on the future of growth.
What do we do about this growth, and what do we need to do to get out of this economic stalemate, especially if we look at more on the positive side, the disruptive capability or capacity of technologies that we can really utilize if we have better economic management, if we make the right decisions. One, the importance of building the right institutional capabilities and investing in human capital. These are no-regret things that are long-term driven, that need to happen, regardless of what you want to do. Whether you want to utilize a lost opportunity or you want to catch up, these two elements are extremely important. And if you want to leverage the power of technological disruption, generative AI, it's even more important. The more institutionally capable you are, the more the people in your economy and society are ready and more active and more, I'd say, not considered idle capacity, the better you are in a position to leverage and not be left behind.
If the difference between 3% and 5% growth means $3 trillion per year, that's $500 for each person on the planet. That's a huge amount of money that would allow us to pay down debt faster, would allow us to reduce inequality, would allow us to innovate more. So again, this is not an abstraction. It's really the basis of prosperity and stability. So we are not in the same world as we were 20 years ago. And this is really important. You know, we have geopolitics, you mentioned it, fragmentation. We have to embed sustainability. We need to make sure that we address the AI consequences, because again, this could potentially be huge for the world, but could aggravate the problems. The answer is in the private sector. It's the private sector that unleashes growth, and we don't have the financing. There's already too much debt. So it's up to the private sector. It's the private sector that's going to create the wealth that we can then redistribute. So we need to think about what ways, and this is government's role, to create the frameworks that allow the private sector to do our job properly. Without going into much more, let me just say two things. One is productivity. Obviously, that's the answer, and Draghi said it in his report, and we all know that. But there's another one which is really important, which is, and I say, let's take a pause on regulation and supervision, because that is constraining growth big time.
It is not Trump we need to look at. It's actually we need to look at why we're not doing the same, why we haven't created a Doge.
And it does not happen by accident. That's the other thing, is I think that people think, you know, there are a lot of policies out there that actually inhibit growth, and the fact we're having 3.3% growth is in a way despite of some of the general approach that governments take. So I look at it as there's so many elements of a system that defines and therefore fosters growth. You have to have an educational system, as we talked about, that allows people to unleash their human potential. You have to have an educational system also that really focuses on innovation and creativity, because I think that is actually a foundation of the future, you know, in terms of unleashing that human potential to think about the future in new ways and to drive growth. Having the rule of law is critically important to support and protect companies and protect people as they bring those ideas forward, and make sure that they have strong protections. And at the same time, having an innovation ecosystem that allows for those innovators to raise capital successfully in multiple stages of their lives. So the very earliest stage all the way up until they're the largest companies. And that funding ecosystem is critically important. But then on top of that, so that's all done within, I would say, a cultural norm that starts to become self-fulfilling. On top of that, then you have to have government policies. And I think, as we've talked about, regulation is a huge element of government policies that can either foster or inhibit growth. Tax policies, the stick and the carrot, right, in terms of inhibiting and fostering certain types of growth. How do you want to take your economy forward? How do you want to unleash the greatest assets you have within your country and make sure that they're used to their fullest potential? And then, of course, then also a global ecosystem. And I'm a huge believer in global capital flows and the global economy. I think globality has been a growth driver for the world. Now we are entering into a new phase of what that looks like in terms of maybe more bilateral agreements, bilateral relationships. But still, though, connecting the world together with capital, with ideas, with innovation, and the next generation of innovation, I think, is going to be what continues to drive growth.
But here's the big thing. I've been doing this for 45 years now. There hasn't been a moment when the technological possibilities ahead of the world have been as bright as they are today. And artificial intelligence, I believe artificial intelligence will ultimately be to the internet as the computer was to the calculator. So it is a moment of stunning technological possibility. And I suggest just 3 or 4 things very quickly that are important. First, with all that opportunity, capital should not be flowing heavily into government debt as an alternative to all that fantastic investment. And 6 of the 7 G7 countries now have debt to GDP ratios above 100%. And in my country, it is further from being on a sustainable path than any time probably in history. Because it is unsustainable at a time when we're at full employment. The debts have to be controlled. The system has to be made legitimate and to work for everybody. No country is going to succeed without teammates in the global economy. But let's remember that we need allies if we are going to succeed in this world. Everywhere, governments need to understand the central importance of execution. And if we can get a government that is less about having new ideas and taking on new missions and responding to new market failures, and more about executing on fighting the fires, keeping the streets safe, collecting the taxes efficiently, and letting businesses function, there are huge potentials ahead.
I agree that fixating on the US transition can be an unnecessary distraction to addressing the real issues faced by different geographies, especially Europe, noting that all countries without exception are dealing with a tougher context, and you could say their plates are full. To emphasize the difference in the global context is important. Globalization as we used to know it is being recalibrated. We are seeing more economic fragmentation and new levels of unpredictability in the geopolitics. Amid this, Europe has to find and execute new drivers to restore consumer confidence and growth. The same in the UK. In South Africa, the ruling government is fast losing political capital. And in Nigeria, the government has implemented quick wins and initiated reform addressing issues like removal of fuel subsidies, deregulating and liberalizing foreign exchange markets, tax reforms, and ease of doing business reform. But you still get a sense that the Tinubu government is progressing to take us to where South Africa was, say, 5 years ago. And this most likely is not going to be enough. Rebasing economic data in Nigeria will not address the reality of low productivity on the ground, for example. Anna Butin, Chairman Santander, the World Economic Forum, that's at the session we just saw, said something that is becoming more evident, and that is economic growth is critical for prosperity and stability. Voters are less tolerant of tepid economies, talk less of very weak ones, as the leaders are increasingly finding out. Looking at the Nigeria situation, the need to get GDP growth over 5% in a manner that is inclusive cannot be overemphasized. First, high government debt is crowding out capital for private enterprise. Far too much is being done by government and in an inefficient manner. The growth we need will come from the private sector, supported by a government that creates the best environment for the sector to thrive. Slimmer, less debt-stricken government is not just about fiscal prudence. A large, heavily indebted public sector is a weight that the economy pays costly for, starving the more efficient and capable capital-hungry private sector the liquidity they need for innovation, with small and medium-sized ventures unable to easily find the adequate funding that they need to get started and to thrive through their various stages of incubation. High government debt also hurts the financial ecosystem for risk-taking, especially negative for the new army of creative innovators. The Nigerian government balance sheet needs reimagination and bolder rethinking on shrinking the size and cost of governance. We can't over-repeat this. Today, the broader financial ecosystem is crippled by limited capacity. Innovators and entrepreneurs, like I said, cannot get capital. They need to fund bolder innovation, and banks are not taking risks as they should simply because they don't need to. Second, a fresh refocus on effective execution is absolutely important. I like how Larry Summers put it. Governments have to learn how to execute better. In Nigeria, agonizing over how to share VAT is perhaps less productive when the government has not yet figured out how to achieve more efficient practices in compliance, assessment, and collecting taxes. Good execution is not accidental. It would take very fresh rethinking, strong leadership, and courage to scrap many processes or making them far smarter than they currently are. To get innovation and growth blossoming, regulations and processes at ports, at the regulatory spots, institutions have to be re-engineered deliberately to grow enterprise and help manufacturing and other sectors to thrive. In the last episode where we spoke of trade in Africa, we spoke of so many things that could still be done to improve and get export growth. It all comes down to execution. Third, the biggest pathway, like we said, to get growth is via technology and digitally driven infrastructure upgrades, definitely, and investments in the right environment for technology to thrive are absolutely critical. Electricity access, internet, and all the related infrastructure to support the future digital economy are all very key, and upgrade programs have to be accelerated. The government cannot afford any further missteps and should be harnessing its best talents and capabilities to fix these game-changing areas. The other important issue for Nigeria has to be education and talent. It comes down to updating the inventory of the skills we need in the medium term and being realistic on what we actually have, seeing the gaps and executing a bold talent and education initiative that addresses a future that is very, very different from what we had, say, 5 years ago. Countries that find fresh pathways for growth will be those that execute well, that execute the needed interventions and reforms that can reignite economic revival. Those that do not could be mired in political instability, dragged down by the acute discontent of their populations. Well, that's all we have on this episode of Global Business Insights. Thanks for watching, and please share and subscribe to follow the channel. This is Bodhi Shosami.